the train that never stops. Rain had been falling over the town of Blackmore for 3 straight days when Daniel heard the train. The sound came at exactly 12:07 in the morning. At first, he thought it was thunder. Then came a metallic vibration. A deep rumble passed beneath the ground, followed by a long, distant whistle. Daniel sat up in bed. He listened. Nothing. Then, ho, the whistle came again. Daniel looked at the clock. 12:07 a.m. He walked to his bedroom window and pulled the curtain aside. Beyond the glass, Blackmore was covered in rain and fog. The town had no active railway. The nearest working railway station was almost 40 miles away. Daniel knew that, because he had lived in Blackmore for most of his life. There had once been a railway line here, but it had been abandoned decades ago. The tracks had been removed. The station had been demolished. At least, that was what everyone said. Daniel stared into the darkness. Then he saw something. 2 pale lights moving through the fog. They traveled across the distant field. Slowly at first, then faster. Daniel's heart began beating harder. A train passed behind the trees. He could see only fragments of it through the rain. Black metal, old windows, dim yellow lights. Then it disappeared. Daniel stepped away from the window. He told himself it had been a hallucination. He had been awake too long. The storm was playing tricks on him. But the next morning, he found something outside his house. A railway ticket. It was wet, old, almost completely black. Daniel picked it up. There was no company logo, no station name, no destination. Only one thing was printed on it. Daniel Reed. Under his name was a time. 12:07 a.m. Daniel dropped the ticket. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he walked back inside. He never told anyone. Not that day. Not that night. But the following evening, Daniel searched the internet for information about Blackmore's old railway. Most of the results were useless. Then he found a scanned newspaper article from 1987. The headline read, "Blackmore Night Train Disappears." Daniel opened the article. A passenger train had departed Blackmore Station at 12:07 a.m. on October 17, 1987. It was supposed to travel north. It never arrived. 43 passengers and 3 railway workers were aboard. Search teams found nothing. No wreckage. No bodies. No damaged tracks. The train simply vanished. Daniel continued reading. A smaller paragraph at the bottom caught his attention. Several residents reported hearing the train after its disappearance. The official explanation was atmospheric noise. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Another sentence followed. The railway company denied that any train had departed at 12:07. Daniel stopped reading. Something about the article felt wrong. He searched for the station. Old photographs appeared. Blackmore Station had once stood at the edge of town. A large stone building. 3 platforms. A tall clock tower. Daniel looked at the photograph. Then he noticed the clock. Its hands were frozen at 12:07. That night, Daniel stayed awake. He waited. 11:50. Nothing. 11:58. Nothing. 12:03. The wind stopped. 12:06. The room became strangely cold. 12:07. The whistle sounded. This time it was much closer. Daniel ran to the window. Fog covered the street. Then 2 headlights appeared at the end of the road. Daniel stared. The headlights grew larger. Something was moving through the fog. A train. But there were no tracks. The train traveled silently down the middle of the street. Its wheels made no sound. Its black metal body reflected the rain. Daniel watched as it passed his house. Every window was illuminated, and every seat was occupied. The passengers were completely still. Men and women in old-fashioned clothes. Some looked terrified. Some looked exhausted. Some simply stared forward. But one thing was common. Every passenger was looking directly at Daniel. Then the final carriage passed. A man stood beside the last window. Daniel recognized him. He was the old railway worker from the newspaper photograph. The man lifted one hand. He pointed at Daniel. Then he pointed toward the door. Daniel stepped backward. The train vanished. The street became empty again. Daniel did not sleep. At sunrise, he called the local historical society. An elderly archivist named Martin answered. Daniel asked about the Blackmore night train. There was a long silence. Then Martin said, "Where did you hear about that?" "I found an old newspaper article." "You shouldn't go looking for it." Daniel frowned. "Why?" Martin's voice became quieter. "Because people who hear the train eventually see it. And eventually, the train sees them." Daniel felt a chill. "What does that mean?" Martin refused to answer. Daniel asked him to meet. After several minutes, Martin agreed. They met that afternoon at the Historical Society's archive. Martin was an old man with gray hair and tired eyes. He locked the archive door before speaking. "You heard the train?" Daniel nodded. "Twice." Martin looked troubled. "Then it has noticed you. What exactly is it?" Martin opened an old metal cabinet. Inside were dozens of files. He removed a thick folder. The label read, "Blackmore Express, Restricted." Martin placed it on the table. "This isn't a normal train." Daniel opened the folder. Inside were photographs. The first showed Blackmore Station in 1987. The second showed the missing train. The third showed the railway tunnel north of town. The fourth photograph made Daniel stop. It showed a group of railway workers standing beside the train. One of them was Martin. Daniel looked up. You were there. Martin nodded. I was 28. What happened? Martin stared at the photograph. We were told the train had developed mechanical problems. We were supposed to inspect it. And the train was empty. Daniel frowned. The newspaper says there were 43 passengers. They weren't there yet. What do you mean? Martin slowly turned another page. There was a timetable. The train was scheduled to depart at 12:07. Martin whispered. We boarded at 11:55. Daniel looked confused. There were no passengers? No. Then where did they come from? Martin looked directly at him. They arrived after the train started moving. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Martin continued. The train left the station at 12:07. At 12:08, the passengers appeared. Where? Inside the carriages. Ow! We don't know. What happened next? Martin's face became pale. The train entered the Blackmore Tunnel. And it never came out. Daniel looked at the photographs again. Were you on the train? Martin shook his head. I jumped off before it entered the tunnel. Why? Because I heard someone knocking from inside the engine room. Daniel stared at him. What was knocking? Martin swallowed. I don't know. Then why were you afraid? Martin leaned forward. Because there was nobody inside. Daniel said nothing. Martin closed the folder. Forget the train. I can't. You can. I already have a ticket with my name on it. Martin froze. You have a ticket? Daniel nodded. Martin's face changed completely. Show me. Daniel took the ticket from his pocket. Martin stared at it. Then he stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward. Get rid of it. Ow! Burn it. I tried. And it wouldn't burn. Martin closed his eyes. Then it's too late. That night, Daniel returned home. He placed the ticket on the kitchen table. At midnight, he heard the whistle again. 12:07. The ticket moved. Slowly, it slid across the table by itself, then stopped beside the front door. Daniel stared at it. The door handle began turning. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the door opened. Fog entered the house. Daniel stood frozen. Outside was not his street. It was a railway platform. An old platform. Blackmore Station. The abandoned station. The station that had supposedly been demolished decades ago. A train waited on the tracks. Its doors were open. Daniel heard a voice from inside. Daniel Reed. He didn't move. The voice came again. Your train is waiting. Daniel slammed the door. He locked it. Then he moved furniture against it. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps. Inside the house. Daniel slowly turned around. Wet footprints crossed the floor. They began at the front door. They continued through the hallway and stopped outside his bedroom. Daniel's breathing became shallow. A shadow appeared beneath the bedroom door. Someone was standing on the other side. Then came 3 knocks.